Hey guys, what's up? MadSeason here, back with another video for you. Doing something a little different today. We are going to discuss parasocial relationships. As you probably know, this is a relationship between two people defined by imbalance, where one may be heavily invested into the life of another, and the other might not even know of their existence. It's a term that many are much more familiar with today than they were during the dawn of social media. As the era of the influencer has evolved and these dramatic spectacles take place, the relationships between them and their viewers have become more analyzed and understood. And although they can be unhealthy, they can also be lucrative, as a more invested viewer means a more popular influencer. And so, intentional or otherwise, forming these relationships has become quite a cornerstone of what it means to be an online personality. They share not just their face or voice, but also their opinions, their relationships, their past, their present, their future. It's all aired to these public online spaces in order to create investment. But as time has shown, for both viewer and creator alike, it's wise to tread carefully within the world of social media, as these relationships have the tendency to spiral out of control. But knowing their definition doesn't mean that you're immune to them. If emotions were easily controlled, life would be far more simple, and the ability to control them depends not only on the viewer, but also the creator and how they moderate their privacy online, if at all. So today we have a video by Depressed Nasagi, who covers this discussion in the context of VTubers. Now, I'm not a VTuber, but I feel like this might resonate both with me and maybe you guys as well, because I do share some similarities with them, such as having no actual face cam and just being another voice in the ether. I think it's a form of content that feels maybe less personal in some ways and maybe more personal in others, but let's see what he has to say first before we get into that.
Parasocialism. It's a one-sided relationship where a person knows so much about a particular content creator, influencer, fictional character, and in this case VTuber, and forms a certain kind of attachment towards them, while those figures knows nothing about that person. Those kinds of attachment depends on the viewer and content creator, be it familial, friendly, or romantic in nature. It is subtle, insidious, creeping up on people and developing without them not even knowing. One day they...
Insidious is definitely true, but to be clear here, he's talking only about the relationships themselves. I don't like to give the impression that everybody is out to get you and manipulate you. I think that's a pretty unhealthy mindset to have, but just keep in mind that they don't have to be for these relationships to form. There are influencers who have now been exposed for being manipulative or deceitful in order to speed up this process, but attachment doesn't have to be elicited out of you in this way. It's just human nature. The more time you spend with someone or watching someone or listening to them, some form of attachment will exist. As for me, I know all about parasocial relationships. I've done videos about them, and I've been on the receiving end of them, running a channel for nearly 10 years. But even still, there are channels that I've watched where if I were to hear something bad happen to them, it would have an effect on me. Honestly, ask yourself, if something happened to the Monotone Madness and this was the last video you ever heard of me, would you be as apathetic to that compared to reading a random obituary page? Hell no, you'd get party supplies, you pop the champagne. I'm kidding. Well, actually, judging from some of my comments, that might be some people's first reactions. But no, this is an important distinction to make. I'm glad he used the word insidious here because it's perfect. I think that people are under the false impression that knowing the definition of the parasocial relationship means that they can let their guard down, which leaves them vulnerable not just to channels that don't go out of their way to form them, but also, of course, the channels that do, which I'm sure he'll be talking about in this video. It's all about reminding yourself that even if the channel that you watch has a voice as smooth as silk, the relationship is always entertainment. And even then, just understand that the more that you watch someone, it's just inevitable that some feelings or attachment will be formed to at least some degree.
They could enjoy a particular streamer, influencer, or VTuber, and the next they'll find their heart suddenly broken upon hearing those influencers might be in a relationship.
If I said the words I want to say, I'd get suspended. I genuinely hope the absolute worst for you. Burn in hell. Wow. He's mad. This does happen quite frequently, by the way. particularly with female streamers, as you would imagine, and it largely has to do with loneliness, and there are just more lonely men out there on the internet than there are women. And really, these are symptoms of the emotional state of both parties, which is usually ignored. I think I speak for everyone. Loneliness sucks, but as gross as this is, and as much as it sucks, within the world of social media, it's a commodity, because the more lonely you are, the higher chance you are to become attached to anyone. You may settle on a partner that's less than ideal. You may hang around friends who don't treat you as well or whatever, because you're under this pressure of loneliness. At a certain point, your mind may convince you that being in bad relationships is better than being in no relationships. It really just depends on the person. Loneliness affects some people more than others. And in regards to social media, the simple fact of the matter is that some people turn to these channels as a comfort. Parasocial relationships are actually very appealing to the lonely or rejected, because there is no no. The whole point is for the viewer to watch the channel. There's a very small risk of me calling out your name right now and saying, Kyle, fix your fucking hair. Don't watch my videos anymore. Sorry to all the Kyles out there. I had to pick a random name. But my point is that the relationship is never at risk of failing, because one of the many ways that they're one-sided, the invested, aka the viewer, has 100% control if they are to continue or not. And you need no other proof than what he's showing. It is a bad idea, especially if you're a female streamer, especially if you build your platform based on parasocial relationships, to make it known that you have a boyfriend, because it shatters this illusion that people have crafted for themselves, that despite the fact that they've never interacted with them outside of a way that didn't involve a transaction of money, there's a special connection that exists. If they just hold out long enough, this Disney fairy tale love story will begin, and they'll begin a relationship together somehow. And again, we're giving people the benefit of the doubt here. We're speaking simply of those who have no ill intent. We're not even getting to the people who have become aware of this dynamic and they exploit people as hard as humanly possible. Yeah, the world of the online influencer can get really complicated and predatory and gross really fast. So again, it's important to keep in mind here that parasocial relationships and their formation, although they are all inevitable in some way, their intensity is the symptom of another problem, usually loneliness. And just understand that knowing their technical definition doesn't mean that you're immune to them. The best way to protect yourselves against them is to make sure that you're not vulnerable to them, in my opinion, at least.
While in most instances people just unsubscribe or unfollow, or even the usual petty whining in some random image board or Twitter thread, some instances can be so deranged and horrific, like committing suicide after their favorite characters die, or stalking, harassing, and scaring their favorite content creators their entire life. In recent years, parasocialism has been vilified by literally.
So, something to consider here is that due to the very personal nature of social media, that's where they thrive. People have formed parasocial relationships long before its rise, from TV characters, radio hosts, even characters from books. For example, using a TV show here, watching The Red Wedding on Game of Thrones, you're watching ultimately fictional characters being slaughtered, and after they yell cut, all of these people will get up and congratulate each other on a take well done. So why do there exist so many compilations of people just like bawling their eyes out over these fictional characters dying? Well, in some way they've formed this attachment to them. As for social media, as said, the cases are much more prolific. The screenshot he showed here of Amaranth, the guy who stalked her, was from Europe. He sold all of his possessions, including his cat, and he moved to Texas, and he rented a hotel room in view of a P.O. box that she knew she had, and he waited for a red-haired woman to pick it up, followed her back home, where he tried to break in. So, deranged is right, and there are other stories that are worse, sadly. So far, we've really only talked about the negative repercussions for the viewer, so this would be the most obvious one for the content creator.
Their entire life. In recent years, parasocialism has been vilified by literally everyone. Some critiques and problems exaggerated, but often they parrot the same opinion. Parasocialism, bad. And in one way, I agree. The deepest ends of parasocialism are cause for one of the internet's most fucked up stories. But I don't think parasocialism is necessarily bad. See,
He's right, for sure. It just has a negative connotation since the rise of social media. And really, it's only the negative instances that are publicized. There's no huge article about this really positive gaming community and how everybody's really wholesome and supportive of each other. But of course, someone moving across Europe to stalk this well-known streamer is much more interesting and publicized. So over time, there is a negative connotation that has formed around the term. But a couple of examples of these relationships being leveraged positively would be children's educational shows like Blue's Clues, Dora the Explorer, where these hosts speak directly to the viewer and they treat them as their friend. This is done because the child is much more likely to become immersed and interested. They look at the host as sort of a friend, and they therefore become more open to learning because of that. The same was true with Mr. Rogers, and it's not just for kids. The Joy of Painting with Bob Ross is another good example for a show aimed for audiences of all ages. If you were to ask someone why they enjoyed watching Bob Ross, 90% of the time they're going to say that he has a calming presence and a pleasant personality, not that they actually want to learn how to paint. So that's an important distinction to make. The term itself isn't negative, it just has a negative connotation, and you can find plenty of examples where they're leveraged in positive ways.
Parasocialism is more nuanced than that. While everyone simplifies it to just a person developing some kind of obsessive or unrequited attachment towards someone or something, there are actually layers and depths to consider. A weeb seeing the boys on Trash Taste and listening to their podcast every day because they're just like me for real. A man inspired after his favorite influencer that once suffered the same problem that he had, overcome it. A man deciding to learn a language just because their favorite VTubers knows how to speak it. Parasocialism isn't the Venta Black concept that many people paint it as. It can be healthy. In fact, I would argue most cases of parasocialism is actually healthy. We all have parasocial relationships in some shape or form. By its technical definition, being a fan of someone is a parasocial relationship. And most of the time, that actually helps us grow. Like learning a language, mastering an instrument, becoming a good dancer, or even just a temporary escape from the harsh world so that we can come back refreshed and ready to face it again. Sometimes, we just need...
Yeah, exactly. Again, the term itself isn't negative. It's just that they're seen to be negative due to these very crazy events that you see on social media. The crazy obsessed stalker, or the influencer exploiting people's loneliness in order to solicit donations from them. I'm sure many of you guys have a parasocial relationship with me. In November, it'll actually be 10 years I'll have done YouTube, and some of you have been watching for that long, which is crazy. It's very hard, I think, in fact, to not form these relationships in these cases, but again, it only becomes an issue if you want to wear my skin, or if I were to say something like, by becoming a member to my channel for ad-free early access to my videos for the low price of $4.99 a month, that means that we're really close friends.
Our role model and Oshis to give us encouraging words. Sometimes, we just need a temporary escape. But when people start depending on them and reach the deep end, that's when the parasocialism problem actually becomes a problem. When requests for words of encouragement become pushy for words of validation. When instead of being inspired by your favorite content creators to fix your issues, one ignores it and retreats to them for comfort. When one escapes reality and leaves for good. Many people have talked about the dangers of parasocialism, especially that of a romantic nature. I'm not going to be one of them, though I did offer my opinion, and that's going to be crucial for my overall message in this video. No, I'm here to answer another question that nobody seems to have answered yet. Is the parasocialism problem for VTubers worse? But how do you even measure that? What is a base form of parasocialism? By worse, I don't actually mean the level of intensity, because parasocial fans going absolutely batshit crazy over their favorite influencers is not exclusive to VTubers. In fact, I actually think in terms of degree, the VTuber industry isn't that problematic. At least, compared to K-pop and Dream stans, they're way fucking worse. By worse, I mean how heavily the culture of VTubing not just revolves around it, but also needs it. Even more so than normal streaming communities. In fact, the industry banks on it, indirectly encourages it. However, this isn't exactly new. Tons of companies and industries like the K-pop industry, the American boy band culture, and the Japanese idol culture fosters and encourages parasocialism in all manners of depth, because it's the thing that draws in the money. It also doesn't help that the VTuber boom started in 2020, literally the time where many people were isolated, lonely, and in a bad spot in their life due to pandemic lockdowns. While the healthy part of parasocialism got these people to forget about their loneliness momentarily and eventually get back to their feet, the dangerous part is that now some people vicariously live off of these anime girls. But
Yeah, and that's actually a really good area to highlight if you want to make the argument that these relationships are often formed from a void, is how more intense they became during the COVID pandemic. I think that's the real issue that a lot of people miss when discussing these relationships. The finger is pointed more on the relationships themselves instead of what is causing them, whether that be someone staving off loneliness with them or predatory influencers exploiting them to grow their channels. In these cases, the relationships are a symptom, not a cause, and demonizing them is the equivalent of rubbing salve on a tumor, I think. A well-adjusted person who's happy with their life doesn't sell all of their belongings and move across country, and a person who isn't really lonely and desperate doesn't donate thousands of dollars to hot tub streamers. And just to say this here, not to give the impression that loneliness is something to be ashamed of. Again, I think we've all been there at some point in our lives. It's a pretty common thing. What I'm saying here is that the problem here is vulnerability and people both not guarding themselves against that and the other people who take advantage of that. So I really like that he's making that distinction here.
while parasocialism exists everywhere in the media, streaming communities in general are more prone to developing it, since viewers and fans actually have a line of direct communication with that person. Viewers share their vulnerabilities with the streamer. They banter, they have inside jokes, and it makes it so that the viewer feels like they know the streamer for real, like they're close friends with them, when in reality they aren't. And
Yep, and you are never friends with them, including me. There is nothing you can say that will change that. There is no amount of money you can give that will change that. In fact, doing that does the opposite because it makes the relationship more based around monetization, and that'll always be true, even if you're led to believe otherwise. And this is all because the reason why the influencer is there to begin with is to entertain, and whether they do that ethically or not depends on each individual channel.
eventually, they go to their streams every time just so they can talk to them, to see what they're up to. Eventually, they develop a parasocial bond. Whether that's on the healthy side or on the deep end ultimately depends on the individual viewer. However, parasocialism can actually also go the other way around. In fact, I'd argue parasocialism first starts on the streamer or VTuber's end. Relatability is a tricky thing to manage as a VTuber. In one hand, they absolutely need it so that people can connect with them and understand them better, which is part of a healthy parasocial relationship, of course, but afterwards, it's their responsibility to put up proper boundaries. Still, no matter what you do, even if you put up that boundary, there will always be fans that will fall to the deep end of parasocialism. Gachis exist for everyone, not just for VTubers. Putting up boundaries serve to lessen the impact of those gachis. But I can't entirely blame the gachis though, because it's actually the influencers that start seeing their chat as their friends first. Because the chat is always there, cheering for them and occasionally tossing them money.
Okay, so this is going to be good. When the negative effects for the creators are discussed, usually it's in the context of the obsessed stalker, but there's much more to it than that. Another one, and I don't really see this talked about too much, is when creators make the mistake of using their audience as their primary means of emotional support.
It's been tough this year.
This is especially true in the streaming world, since it's more of a social activity compared to something like YouTube, is that these streamers use that as a replacement to their social life. And streaming, while it is social to some degree, ultimately it's shallow in the sense that it's lacking human presence, assuming that they're doing it professionally. Although communities can be friendly and positive, that would be ideal. The relationship between streamer and viewer is ultimately based around money. You can be friendly, but if the streamer does it professionally, what are they there for? They're there for money, so that's what this social experience is ultimately based around. Another difference is that if you're in your friends group, everyone is there for each other to have a good time, whereas streaming, most people are there for one person, and It goes on and on. There are many dynamics that differentiate these two social activities, most of them being that streaming is just kind of a shadow of an actual personal network of close friends and family. And what happens is that when you replace this network of people in your life with internet strangers, as kind as they may be, they also tend to turn on them for emotional support, and you start seeing them air all of this laundry and these very intimate personal details for support from their audience. And while they're doing this, they're forming these parasocial relationships, and while these relationships can hold the weight of entertainment, it can't do the same with something as heavy as emotional support, because they're formed ultimately on shaky and fickle foundations. I've had people who've watched me for 10 years, they said they watched every video, and then I share one opinion they don't like about BFA or something, and then I'm like the most evil, heinous villain on earth. They're fickle. When you don't actually know someone personally, there's no depth to the relationship that you would normally have. And I think that's why so often that you see these meltdowns and all of this burnout within the world of streaming and YouTube and everything. Work-to-life balance can be tricky with all occupations, but in the world of social media, it can get complicated because when you're selling your personality, you're having this superficial online social network sort of invading your own personal network, and it takes a certain amount of awareness and restraint to protect yourself against that. And another element, I think, is that if you share intimate details of your life to strangers on the internet, you're giving them power over you by giving them a say in your life, by showing them that you're looking for their opinion as well as their support. And strangers are more likely to hurt you compared to a real-life friend who you know and trust. So unless it's just complete lies and deception, there's a certain amount of vulnerability that's created when you share personal stuff in your life. And it's a bad idea to do that with strangers on the internet, because there's just going to be people who want to fuck with you.
Am I to deserve your time and money? I need to repay you would become their mentality. And this bond would deepen for better or worse, usually worse, when eventually the VTuber shares their vulnerabilities, past traumas, and too much of themselves to their audience. It's an indirect invite for other people to start pouring their hearts too, and thus starts a cycle where they essentially feed on each other. Some people trauma dumps during a random moment on a stream and sees their VTuber as a waifu therapist.
Exactly. And speaking for myself here, anyone who's familiar with my channel knows how unfamiliar they are with me. You guys don't really know anything about my personal life because I don't share anything. He mentioned this trauma dumping dynamic. If you don't know, this is where the viewer will sort of talk about their personal and intimate struggles to a streamer in the chat. I can't speak for everyone, but generally streamers don't like this because it kills their mood, as they say. They say it brings their atmosphere down, and they'll say it takes focus off of having fun and focusing all the attention on one person. But really, a lot of the times, from what I've seen, they kind of set themselves up for it by way of being very personal and intimate themselves to their audience. By doing this, the precedence has been set, and there's this unspoken message that's sent to the viewer that, okay, this is a safe space to talk about this sort of stuff. And then the streamer gets mad, making a Reddit post saying how selfish this person is. But just know that opening some doors might be easy, but closing them is another story. And if they want to minimize trauma dumping, the best way to start is by keeping your cards close to your chest. It won't make your channel completely free of it, but it will reduce it. But, that's the struggle because, again, parasocial relationships are good for growth. As an influencer, you are selling your personality. To get people to watch your content, you have to get them interested in your opinion. To get them interested in your opinion, you have to get them interested in your personality. And to get them interested in your personality, you have to be personal. But it goes both ways. You need two people to form a relationship of any kind, and relationships are formed on the basis, not on reciprocation, but the desire and expectation of reciprocation.
And some people dedicate entire months of their lives making videos worshipping a single VTuber. Okay, maybe two. It's especially worse for VTubers who are troubled because the chat starts developing some kind of savior complex. That's the reason why a lot of VTuber fans love unstable girls and menheras, because they're just like me for real, and to them, they're way cuter than a normal professional VTuber. As such, this is a part of the job for most VTubers. Even if one is literally the funniest VTuber ever, they often need to skirt the edges of parasocialism, even more so than regular streamers, to find the middle between the shallow and the deep end. They can't stay completely unparasocial with their audience for long because parasocialism is the lifeblood of this industry. It's what fans expect and want from VTubers.
Yeah, and I really like this image, by the way, because notice that although they're all at different levels, they're all wet to some degree because, like you said, they're required.
Because parasocialism is the lifeblood. VTubers fortunately manage to find these sweet spots, and those that go over the edge end up in unpredictable places. As examples, Rusha got gutted and was humiliatingly exiled from Hololive, and Vox is seeking professional mental help after the whole Reimu drama, and maybe developing into a Menhera himself. Yes, they're still active and popular, but they've earned themselves quite controversial reputations. Yes, they're still making bank, and they still want to pursue the GFE and BFE experience. But at what cost? Of course, I'm not saying that Rusha or Vox deserved the mental damage that was inflicted upon them due to parasocial fans and criticism, but what I am saying is that it's par for the course. Things like these were naturally going to happen. There's even a chance that it'll continue to worsen as they keep descending into the abyss. And again, everything that I've said so far aren't exclusive to VTubers. They happen to regular streamers too. However, the reason why I think it's a tad more problematic for VTubers is because VTubers are easier to objectify. VTubers appear as anime characters. They play into a kayfabe or character archetype. And due to this, it's really easy to forget that they're still human. That they're just entertainers, that they're just doing their job. There's already a growing global culture of men replacing real relationships with waifus, and pair this up with the idol culture, which I'll talk about later, and you get a special kind of problem.
This is actually a really interesting point he's bringing up. I think that if you don't have a face cam, it's harder to form a parasocial relationship, as there's no actual human in front of you. It's one of the many reasons why I don't have it. But it's not unprecedented that people form relationships with fictional characters. If you think this is outlandish, like I mentioned earlier, people can get them from books, words on paper. An example that may come to your mind about this is when John Lennon got murdered, where Mark David Chapman formed a parasocial relationship with the protagonist of The Catcher in the Rye, Holden Caulfield, who had a distaste for phonies. Chapman believed that Lennon was a phony, preaching minimalism while living a pretty lavish life, and he claimed that Holden would have killed Lennon had he been real, and he called himself the catcher in the rye of his generation. So, relating back to the world of VTubing, it's a little different because it's real people controlling these fictional puppets, but the puppets themselves are still fictional, but still that doesn't make them immune to parasociality and obsession. Human emotions are complicated, for sure, and some people just have less control over them than others.
But things get even more complicated when you remember that it's part of the magic of VTubers. Them role-playing is part of the appeal of the gimmick of VTubing. VTubers are basically interactive shows when you think about it. Them acting like caricatures, playing into tropes, being a NEET because they're just like me for real, playing into the shipping culture, these are all parts of a VTuber's appeal, and the natures of these appeal makes parasocial relationships all the more easier to form. It's much harder for VTubers to manage their fans because they have to keep that magic alive while making sure most of their fanbase doesn't fall too deep into parasocialism. And if their fanbase have already fallen into the deep end, whether intentionally or accidentally, they start walking on eggshells. Most of the time, VTubers fail in managing that balance because parasocialism is already a key component of the VTuber culture, and sometimes it even dictates the success of a VTuber. Of course, while parasocialism is already a necessary component for a regular streamer or influencer, in the case of VTubers, parasocialism isn't just necessary, it's glorified. Enter the simping culture. Originally, the word simp was an insult to men who like female content creators a little too much, to a point where they'd spend a shit ton of money in hopes of getting some action in return. But
yeah, and as far as I know, this is now a banned term on Twitch, if I'm not mistaken, which I think is pretty telling. I mean, they have a section for hot tubs. Like I said, these relationships are profitable. Twitch wouldn't have a softcore porn section and deal with all of this controversy if it didn't bring in some sizable income.
During the VTuber boom, fans have not only adopted that word, they turned it into a badge of honor. The most loyal simps and the craziest, most active whales are respected and glorified. Someone who cashes out literally tens of thousands of dollars to super chat their Oshis in a single month are labeled as mad lads, a god amongst men. Half of the fanbase look at this ironically, but the other half do so unironically. Somehow, the simping culture has distorted our perception of such herbivore behavior. Somehow, the simping culture has made this the norm of the industry. And while I agree that this culture is part of what makes the VTuber community unique, it doesn't make it any less weird when you actually look at it from the outside and look at it without rose-tinted glasses. But again, this culture is what makes the industry special. For better or worse, it is also part of the magic of VTubing. In fact, this culture is why the VTuber boom happened in the first place, and why Hololive became the most popular global VTuber agency. Because the thing about industries is that the top dogs will always be the trendsetters. What they do is what most people follow in order to get a similar result. Hololive's idol niche became the meta for the industry when the VTuber boom happened, and as a result, idols and VTubers have become intertwined, permeating to every corner of the VTuber industry. Idols have something of a problem with parasocialism already, so it's only natural that it was going to make it worse. The toxic side of the idol culture, which is the whole not talking to males thing among others, spread out across the VTuber industry.
This is actually a really good point he's making that I didn't consider. This objectification element is pretty comparable to the aforementioned pop industry dilemma where they're not allowed to talk about their boyfriends because it shatters this illusion that there's a chance for a romance to blossom.
It's not that any agency, including Hololive, is forcing their VTubers to follow this toxic part of the culture and be parasocial, because it's mostly perpetuated both by the viewers and the individual VTuber. And while this industry has been doing well to shed off toxic parts of the idol culture, like the whole not allowed to talk to males thing, heavy parasocialism is still the lifeblood of the community, and it's where the VTuber industry is still going. One thing that I've observed too is that the parasocial aspect of VTubing is worse for the eastern side of the industry than the western side. The Japanese, the Chinese, or really Asians in general are more prone to fall into the deep end of parasocial relationships, and as a result, they're the most loyal and profitable, but also the most volatile. There's a fine line between dangerous and healthy parasocialism. In fact, that's pretty much the point of this video, to find that line. To find that balance, both as a viewer or a streamer. Healthy parasocialism are healthy VTuber and fan relationships, when a VTuber knows that their chat are just their fans and not their friends, appreciating them but still keeping a distance. When viewers know that the VTubers are just doing their job, still buying into their kayfabe and having fun but maintaining a healthy separation. But dangerous parasocialism is dependency or codependency between VTuber and fan, when the lines blur both for the chat and streamer, and they feel the need to see each other to complete their day. When the viewers start seeing the VTuber as their waifu therapist, a romantic, or their friend. Healthy parasocialism is the reason that the magic of VTubers exists, and it's one of the elements that make VTubing unique. Enjoying your Oshis as cute anime girls doing cute anime things is one of the most unique experiences of online entertainment. But dangerous parasocialism is the horror of the VTuber community, as it can ruin entire fan bases, VTubers, and further damages the reputation of the industry. The moment you buy into the illusion too much and forget that these VTubers are just normal human beings doing their job as entertainers, is the moment you start to slip on the edge. The moment you stop being a fan and start seeing yourself as their friend or lover, is the moment you need to take a step back. All of us are parasocial towards someone or something in various degrees, but when you start substituting parasocial relationships for actual real relationships, realize that you're falling on the deep end. The parasocial problem only becomes a problem when you let it become a problem. Hey everyone, thanks for watching this video.
Good video. I really like this, Depressed Nasagi. I especially liked how he focused on these relationships themselves not being negative, because I think there's a lot of misinformation going on around that, and really they're just a symptom of a larger problem such as loneliness or mental health struggles. I think that there's responsibility for both sides. I think that the influencer is responsible for maintaining some boundaries and to not lean on strangers emotionally. And in fact, I think ultimately in the long run, it's to their benefit. And as for the viewer, I think it's important to remind yourself that the relationship is based upon entertainment. I don't know, maybe FAP before donating tens of thousands of dollars to the hot tub streamers. Post-nut clarity certainly saves lives. And just understand that, as a viewer, the big point he mentioned here is that parasocial relationships are good for the growth of channels. They're required, in fact. And while there are channels out there who are respectful and ethical about it, there are others who are not, to put it lightly. These relationships can be addictive because they serve to distract you from your problems, not solve them. So if you do feel like you're in a vulnerable position yourself emotionally, it's more cause to have your guard up, because unfortunately we do live in a world where these vulnerabilities are targeted and exploited, especially through the safety of the internet. But yeah, thanks for watching. Cool video. This is a little bit different from the norm, but if you've seen some of my other videos, you'd know that I'm really interested in anything social media related. I think it's quite fascinating, so I might do some other reacts here and there about parasocial relationships or audience capture or anything social media related. But yeah, I appreciate it as always, and make sure that you become a channel member, because that means we're best friends and we're gonna get married soon. And like the video if you liked it, because I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
Farewell for now, mortals. We hope you enjoyed today's video. See you again soon.